So I'm standing here on what will be the pedestrian street of our new housing development. We're building here 20 affordable homes, which will be 2/3 for rent and 1/3 for shared ownership. They're going to be really energy efficient, which will mean that they're low cost to run and helping to alleviate fuel poverty. And additionally, the way we've designed these is to really foster community. And this is just amazing because it was only a derelict site just a few months ago. So it's great to see it all popping up here out of the ground.
The Community Land Trust came about after a meeting where there was a possibility of grants being available for community-led housing and community groups in the area, and that piqued the interest of a few people. A Community Land Trust is an organisation that takes ownership of an asset or a property and holds it for the benefit of the community.
And we looked around at what the developers were doing in Halton in terms of affordable housing, and they were too small and too few and too badly designed. They were going to be expensive to heat, and overall we just got very frustrated, myself and a few others, about how poor that standard was.
As a renter myself with a young family, I've seen the sorts of housing that is available in the area, and it's really poor being able to find somewhere that has like no damp and that has like nice fixtures and fittings, and it seems like the quality of housing in the area is quite poor for renters. So it's really nice to be able to be involved in a project that I know are offering a really high standard.
Unusually, there was actually some land already available very close to where we lived in Halton in Mill Lane, which gave us a real opportunity not just to discuss the idea, but to actually think about doing something. We're given the confidence, I suppose, to have a go at doing this from scratch, partly by the experience that already happened in building Lancaster co-housing, and a couple of the people involved in the steering committee had that direct experience, and that was very helpful.
Lancaster co-housing is a development of 41 homes which are all built to Passivhaus standards. It was completed in 2013 after a group of us bought the land and employed an architect and a developer to build all these homes.
The passive houses in the thing are slightly smaller than you might otherwise. The other really big inspiration idea we had was that affordable homes must allow families to thrive. A good, safe, comfortable, easy to heat house is the absolute foundation of any kind of family life. We also decided, fundamental choice was that we wanted to build a passive house energy standard.
Passivhaus is kind of the gold standard of low energy building. It brings all of these technical aspects together: air tightness, lots of insulation, triple glazing.
Typically you're saving £750 or £1,000 a year against a typical heat, particularly now with the way gas prices are going.
In addition, those technical aspects contribute to a much higher quality living environment. They have very, very good indoor air quality, which is incredibly important for reducing respiratory disease. And there have been studies which show that Passivhaus actually improves the social fabric, as it were, of communities. So there are supposedly lower rates of crime in Passivhaus developments, lower rates of ill health, and there's this sort of holistic benefit that arises from making our buildings really good.
It was the first of its type for us in Lancaster District. It was a real opportunity to bring forward a scheme with the community group at the heart of the decision-making process, and that can have a long-term stake and interest in the development in perpetuity, effectively.
Our council priorities are very clear: to take action on climate change, to build local community wealth, and to engage with our communities in a way which gives power and co-creation. So you can see that this Halton project fits every element of that. It really is a standout project for us.
To enable the group to take the scheme to the next stage, we awarded some feasibility funding using our allocation of government community housing fund, and that allowed the group to do an options appraisal with the support of Andy Lloyd,
The biggest decision any group has to make is really whether or not they're going to develop themselves or through a partnership of some sort.
So here we are.
Essentially, groups need to understand the workload and the risk associated with taking on everything themselves. And it is possible, and you can even buy in project management and so on to reduce the workload, but there's still a workload and there's still risk involved.
And so we had a very strong view that our key inputs were to try to set the standard and establish a new way a better way of doing this kind of housing, rather than to do all the nitty-gritty detail ourselves. We just didn't really have the time and energy for that. And so our choice, we needed a delivery partner.
At the same time, we were developing a refreshed 5-year business plan that had a strong emphasis on greening the business, both our new development and retrofitting our existing stock. So we were already in that kind of place as a business, and it came along really at a perfect time within that sort of thought process for us to run with it.
And then we went to meet and they were willing for 4 of us, I think, to go and meet their whole board.
Our USP wasn't that we were Passivhaus experts in any way. This was very much a learning process for us. But what we did have was development capacity around new build. We had some expertise in access to additional technical expertise, consultants, architects, the like, and access critically to funding support from the government through Homes England.
So we decided to go for a long-term leasehold partnership in which the partner, with Housing Association, was going to put money in, large sums of money to build the property, to build the site.
And the Land Trust, they had an aspiration and a red line, I guess, 2 red lines. 1, the scheme would be Passivhaus, which we signed up to, and 2, affordability would be preserved in perpetuity. We wouldn't lose homes to right to buy or right to acquire, as we might normally do as a registered housing provider.
So on a rental property, you wouldn't have a right to buy if it's community-led housing. And on a shared ownership property, you can staircase out. You can increase your percentage share up to 100%. But if you then sell, the housing association has the right to buy back. So the key issue is that the housing association doesn't lose a percentage of its affordable homes every year.
We have a development lease with South Lakes Housing, so it's an agreement where they build the houses according to a certain specification and for a certain, and then they also then take on the management, their ongoing management. So there's an ongoing lease after that. So there's sort of 2 phases to it, and it's quite a unique proposition. And I don't think I can't think that we'd actually were able to find another example where it would work quite the same as ours. So there was nothing, it was a brand new type of lease, so we were having to work from scratch.
So we went through weeks and months of trying to refine an agreement that could both give that sort of element of local control, and the CLT could control the land ownership, but we could have a leasehold interest that was strong enough and didn't have too many chains wrapped around us that we couldn't use that property to raise future funds.
What we have now, though, is we think we have a pretty innovative form of lease that builds in as much of the community-led housing and energy standards ideas as we possibly can for the future, which will stand up legally, and which we can say lenders have accepted this. And so we're now trying to make that available to other people.
So once Lune Valley CLT had selected their preferred partner, we then all discussed next steps in terms of identifying what sort of housing mix and what sort of tenure mix we thought was the most suitable for the scheme. So the starting point for that was for us to do some analysis of the council's own housing register, but we felt that to do a really thorough job, we should look at a survey that's specifically focused on Halton and the surrounding parishes. So the City Council, again using the Community Housing Fund, commissioned ARC4 to do a housing needs survey. And that's why we have a scheme that provides a mix of shared ownership and rented units of different sizes To take account of the survey findings, they needed a further allocation of funding from the City Council to acquire the freehold interest of the land. The Council was able to do that in the form of a commuted sums payment. So that is developers' contributions that the City Council receives through planning that helps us to deliver affordable housing that would otherwise not be viable. So typically that has happened where we've supported registered providers to bring forward new affordable housing, and this was the first instance where the City Council had actually given that type of grant to a community group, and since then we've actually amended the policy so we could consider doing it in the future.
When we interviewed some architects, we did a long list of people with passive house experience. That was important to us because we didn't have that passive house expertise. Charles and the group were fine with that, but we wanted to select our consultants jointly, so we wouldn't go off in a huddle and just do it all ourselves and say to the CLT, there's your product. I don't think that would have worked anyway. I think we wanted to do it all open book together in partnership, a true partnership.
There was a tender exercise and a process, and then we got both the Housing Association and Community Land Trust to come up to Glasgow to see some of the houses that were built to Passive House for social housing, and to see the factory that and the process of how that happened. And because it's Scottish and because it's Passive House, it's Passivhaus, of course it is, and so we've been building quite a lot of those in Scotland.
We saw some passive houses. We saw a facility that John Gilbert's operate in Glasgow where they have a sort of example house inside a warehouse.
And we were very keen, of course, to make sure that the vision of what we wanted to see, and it wasn't just the energy and the space, it was things like the community layout and can we encourage community development on the site. We didn't just want a suburb. So we wanted to have a say, and the way the design team was set up was that the 3 members of the CLT just became formal members of the design team. That was me and Rachel, who's an architect, and Lois, who's an expert in passive house.
And that led us to take the initial feasibility that had been done and consider it and kind of really think about what that was delivering, more than just how many units of housing it was delivering.
There were several iterations that we went through in terms of how we would lay out the dwellings, including having like a shared community garden to the rear of all of the homes. And the design we ended up with was having all of the homes facing into one pedestrian street, which we felt in the long term would give much better opportunities for people to pass by their neighbours in an incidental kind of a way, as opposed to I'm going to go out to see my neighbours in the back garden. I think that community element is one of the really interesting and exciting parts of the project, because you don't see that a lot in new developments. So combining that with the passive house, I think this is really going to be a very innovative and almost groundbreaking development.
That's really the real influence of the co-housing, and it's also taking the model, the car-free model of the co-housing here, and saying, well, actually we don't need a car outside everyone's house. We can put the cars to the edge.
And having the car park space on the outside means that we don't have to have internal tarmac, and that maximises the opportunity we have for biodiversity. Under the Environment Act, there are going to be some new biodiversity rules about having to have a 10% net gain in biodiversity on every site, which developers are going to find very hard to provide unless they do some dramatic changes in the way they typically design their suburban layouts.
So we're looking to develop a future-proofed electric vehicle charging system network that will give opportunities for the occupants to access electric vehicle charging in spite of the fact that they don't have a private driveway. So we've received funding from Electricity North West to develop this for us.
The other idea is that we wanted to provide as much renewable energy as we can to the site as a whole, given that nearby we have the Halton Lune hydro and we have more renewables, solar PV, who have more than enough power to provide the site, and very likely at a cheaper cost than you'd buy off the distribution system.
So throughout the planning permission process, we had in-person consultation, and we were able to take this online when the pandemic hit. And any concerns that arose during that were addressed individually.
It meant that when we went into planning, we didn't get any representations from the local community, and it went through planning really quite smoothly.
The contractors were brought in around autumn time 2020, and we had a tender process wherein we put the design out to 5 different contractors.
And Tyson are a Blackpool-based firm who are doing the work. We have worked with them before. They do lots of work locally in this area. They're excellent.
We really wanted to win this contract because of that Passivhaus standard and building to Passivhaus. We are now able to go back out to the market and talk to other housing associations to say, look, we are currently building to Passivhaus standard. The Passivhaus standard brings with it a whole new dimension of energy efficiency, which is so incredibly important at the moment with what's happening. But it's also relatively simple.
The details involved with Passivhaus, they're different to a standard traditional build, normal timber frame, which we do, but not massively. They're not having to learn new skills. It's stuff that they've done before. It's just a different way of doing it, and just to a higher standard.
Does it come like this?
Yeah, it comes that shape. It's basically rebated, so it fits together just to stop having a straight joint all the way through to let air through.
We call Sam our Mohamed Salah of our salmon. He's at the top. You know, he's our Premier League striker, because we needed somebody here who could deal with the minutiae of the design and the intricacy of the design and the attention to detail. So Sam and 4 other colleagues did the Passivhaus training, the original contractor training, and then Sam and another one of our colleagues, so we have a backup, did the tradesperson qualification. So at the moment that's the highest level of qualification that you can get.
It's down to me to relay that information and basically ensure that the lads on site are working to that standard and following the details that have been designed on the drawing.
One of our requirements as an organisation is to skill up or help to train our supply chain. The primary component in the supply chain is the timber frame, and we work really closely with the timber frame manufacturer to produce a frame that was Passivhaus compliant, and this is their first Passivhaus project, so there's real learning there. We have got a junior apprentice member of staff, and we engage closely with local schools, in this particular instance Lancaster and Morecambe College, and we'll be having both student visits here, we'll have some placements here.
It's very satisfying turning a crazy idea into something that's actually there on the site. And of course, what you mustn't forget is that there's a huge number of different people involved, lots of sources of funding, lots of sources of expertise, all suddenly come together and finishing up with actually houses built on a site and people living in them. It's a wonderful process.
We've had a range of interest in the homes from locals, so people who have lived in the area for a really long time, some people who have had short periods away and then they've moved back to Halton, some people living with family and they really want to move on and have their own home, and that's just not been possible because of the houses that are available in Halton.
We in this district are looking for more community-led projects. We've been putting the word out already that any group that would like to talk to us about community-led projects should come to us. Also, we have a housing advisory group, and that group has looked particularly at community-led projects and is very keen to support those who wish to create a project. And in fact, I think there are at least 2 possible projects that might arise from that. So we're really looking forward to creating some more community-led housing in our district.
I think there's a real opportunity at the moment. There is quite a serious housing crisis. There are actually very few mechanisms for delivering housing in the UK at the moment. Not all of those mechanisms work for a lot of communities, and that communities delivering housing, there is an established route for them to be able to do that, particularly if they team up with an experienced housing association or housing developer. Then there's some really exciting possibilities for keeping young people in communities, keeping a community together,